Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. Before I discuss my thoughts and feelings as Kenobe as a series and talk about my thoughts and feelings about the finale, we need to discuss the two sides of Disney Star Wars. Yes, I'm sure you're well aware there are two sides here, and there's an incoming civil war. In fact, it's happening right now as we speak. So one side of Disney Star Wars is Kathleen Kennedy. Kathleen Kennedy was behind the sequel trilogy. And we know how that came apart at the seams. But how did that come apart at the seams? Because the reason there's a second side to Disney Star Wars is because Kathleen Kennedy herself failed. So she brought in J.J. Abrams to direct and co-write Star Wars The Force Awakens, which I think is a solid attempt at a Star Wars movie. It's mystery box, it launches some interesting things, it's well directed, and absolutely there's nothing wrong with Daisy Ridley being the lead of, kind of this female version of a Luke Skywalker, if you like, in a Star Wars sequel trilogy. But the key moment when this was all ruined, really, was when they decided, aka Bob Iger, that they would not adapt George Lucas's sequel trilogy, because if they did, it would have been amazing. And God knows where Disney Star Wars would be right now, because I do believe that Kathleen Kennedy's original idea of doing, a sequel trilogy movie, a kind of a Skywalker saga movie every other year, then a Star Wars story movie the other year, it was a good idea. So when they failed, and when they created this divisive chasm with The Last Jedi, they were saying, we're not going to do that anymore. There's too much Star Wars. That's what the problem is. They were trying to blame everything but the main reason. So as I say, Kennedy brought in J.J. Abrams. All they had to do was allow him to stick the landing and stay there for the trilogy. I don't know whose decision it was. But, for example, Rian Johnson, who wrote and directed The Last Jedi, shouldn't be gate-crashing somebody else's franchise. If you fancy him as a creative that much, give him his own Star Wars story, his own trilogy, separately. Let him do what the fuck he wants. You see, Rian Johnson and The Last Jedi remind me of Stephen Moffat when he took over Doctor Who, and he tore down everything that RTD did. There are comparisons between Russell T Davies and J.J. Abrams, very, very similar, vibrant creatives. I know a lot of people don't like J.J. Abrams anymore, but he'll always have love and respect from me for doing Alias, Lost, Fringe, and a lot of great things within the industry. We can't forget, just because of the bad, we can't forget the good. That's very, very important to me. But that's the problem, and that's kind of reminded me of Rian Johnson and The Last Jedi, because it was a bit like Stephen Moffat took everything down that RTD did, and that's what Rian Johnson was trying to do. This is why it made no sense to me why J.J. Abrams wasn't involved in the middle film, and originally was never going to be involved in the third movie either. So, an absolute mess over there on Kathleen Kennedy's side. And of course, Kathleen Kennedy started this whole The Force is Female thing. She wanted female representation, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the haphazard way she went about it. Why couldn't Rey be trained? Why couldn't Rey earn the right to be a Jedi? And why did Rey, this whole thing about Rey Skywalker doesn't trigger me like it triggers everyone else, because to me, she's just honouring the Skywalker name. Her grandfather is fucking Palpatine. She don't want to go around calling herself Rey Palpatine, so I get that. But the whole thing was such a mismatch. And I do feel if they at least stuck with Abrams. But the point being, if they just allowed Abrams to adapt George Lucas's sequel trilogy, and George and JJ could have worked together, none of these problems would have happened. But then you have to say the fault is George's as well from the very beginning, selling out to them. He seemed to think they were the best people to sell out to. You certainly wouldn't sell Star Wars to WB after you've seen their mishandling and, mismanagement of the DC Extended Universe. But, I think there was definitely better companies to sell to than Disney. But he thought, they promised they would use his sequel trilogy, and they betrayed him. That's one of the major reasons he sold to them. Then they betrayed him. And it all came out in Bob Iger's autobiography. So basically, that's that side of it. And we'll talk about the Obi-Wan Kenobi show shortly, because that's the Kathleen Kennedy side of Disney Star Wars. Now, the second side is Dave Filoni, let's say his name again, Dave Filoni, of course it is, and Jon Favreau. So what's the difference with them? When you watch The Mandalorian, or even Boba Fett, which some people complained about, it feels like Star Wars. It doesn't necessarily feel a copy and pasting of George's Star Wars, but it's Star Wars for the modern era, for the 21st century. And it really works for me. It's wonderful, beautiful, it looks good, because Jon Favreau is a genius. He is the man who launched the MCU. He directed the first movie. Jon Favreau is a multi-talented person. He's an actor, he's a writer, he's a director. Jon was the right man to come in. But who brought in Jon Favreau to work with Dave Filoni? I'm saying the name again wrong, Filoni. Who put these two together? Well, that wasn't Kathleen Kennedy, that was Kevin Feige. Yes, one of the final things that Bob Iger did before he retired as CEO of Disney was to go to Kevin Feige and beg him to save them, because they bought Star Wars for so much money. They thought they'd be making $1 billion a picture. They thought they'd be pleasing the fans. I don't know how they thought that with the way they went about things. They were in trouble. They needed Kevin Feige to be this fixer. Now, nobody wanted Feige to kind of optically be there and take over. It would make Kathleen Kennedy look bad, because they're not allowed to sack Kennedy because of the agreement pre-written when Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney. So the only person who can actually veto her, from what I can see, is George Lucas, which is insane considering he has sold the company. But that's the stipulation down on the contract. That's what I've heard. Anyway, so what Kevin Feige did was bring in Jon Favreau to work with Dave Filoni. So they came up with The Mandalorian, and it's great. And something you can feel very relaxed about is this Ahsoka TV series. That is on the Jon Favreau side and the Dave Filoni. Dave Filoni created Ahsoka in the animated series Clone Wars. So I can't wait. I was disappointed that we didn't see Ahsoka in the series finale of Obi-Wan Kenobi, because they have well, they don't, but Anakin and Ahsoka have this great history. And just to see her face Vader again would have been awesome, but maybe she has to earn the right to do that, because we don't know when the Ahsoka series is going to be based. So you've got this one side, basically, the side that Feige put together, Favreau, Filoni. Brilliant, brilliant. So when you say Disney Star Wars is bad, you've got to take those words back, because there's one side of Disney Star Wars which is wonderful, and there's another side that can be okay in places, but it certainly doesn't work. And Kennedy has made an absolute mess of it. We've got a show upcoming, I think, called The Acolyte as well, which I expect to be pretty controversial. They can't help themselves. I mean, we can't remain in this civil war between, Kennedy and Kevin Feige, because that's what it is right now. There's two sides of this franchise. It is nuts. I'm just going to enjoy the Feige side, the Favreau side, the Dave Filoni side, because I think it's great. Right, you've watched this video today to get my thoughts about the Obi-Wan Kenobi series and the finale. Right, so let's go there. This is a disjointed series, whether we like it or not. I don't think it's the worst thing ever. I don't think it's the best thing ever. I actually, as we get to the finale, I believe ultimately it was more good than bad. It did make me feel emotional in places. It did work for me in places. The lightsaber duel between Vader and Obi-Wan was nowhere on the level of the fight that Anakin and Kenobi had in Revenge of the Sith. There's no question about it. The directing in terms of that wasn't very good. The basic stuff, the dialogue was okay. But unfortunately, the director, who's actually directed multiple episodes within The Mandalorian, and she's done a great job. So I don't understand what went wrong with Kenobi. So Kenobi is a series. In the first episode, it was poorly directed and edited. I mean, I'll go back to the sequence I mentioned on Twitter and had a good laugh about it, when the stormtroopers, the creatures, are running after Leia, and you can tell they're running slowly, so it looks like she gets away. And that's crazy, because that can only be bad directing, bad editing. It's not acting at all. But what's happened with Kenobi, it's improved as we went on in the series. Now, let's talk about Moses Ingram, because there's been a lot of divisive conversation about Reva, her character. There is nothing wrong with introducing a woman of colour to the Star Wars universe and developing her character via somebody else's series and then giving her her own series if people actually want to see that. I will watch it because it's Star Wars, and maybe they can set something up new and exciting for her character and for the Star Wars legacy. So I'm not against that. Why would I have hate for a woman of colour being introduced into Star Wars? But I think in the beginning of the series, again, the writers, the director, didn't do her any favours. Instead of keeping her background a secret, it should have been something she was flashing back to all the time, having nightmares about, churning inside of her, and all that drove her was revenge against Darth Vader and Skywalker. That should have been the thing. So they mismanaged Moses' character and didn't do her any favours. But as we get to the finale, in the finale, I think she gets a great rounded arc ultimately. And although they didn't start off very well with Moses' Reva character, I think they did quite well with it in the end. They don't deserve any awards for it, and I'll be intrigued to see what they do with Reva. But here's the thing again, and this is why people are talking out of school about her. She was impaled by Darth Vader's lightsaber. And then she's in fucking Mos Eisley, right? Or wherever. Is it Mos Eisley? Where is it? Where is it? Tatooine. Is it Tatooine? Yeah, it's Tatooine. Right, so she's around Tatooine, right? She's been impaled, right? And she's walking around. She's not sweating. She's not trying to heal herself. Could she? I mean, can the Force heal it? I don't know. She was fucking impaled. Vader didn't even make sure she was dead. It was weird. I suppose the idea was for her to slowly die a slow, painful death, but she just got up and went to Tatooine, right? So that is hilarious, and this is why people kind of are saying certain things about this character. So, although her arc started off clumsily, and it didn't really work for me at the beginning, I think they did okay with her in the end, and her arc comes across as a nice, rounded arc. I know some of you have got deep-rooted issues with her because she seems to have been forced into the story. And maybe she has, and maybe it comes across that way. But that still doesn't mean that she doesn't have the right to be there, that they don't, you know, that a woman of colour or a person of colour or a minority shouldn't be in the Star Wars universe, that, you know, she shouldn't be brought into it, forced or not, to try and get some representation, as long as they do justice to this character. And I think they've got a long way to go to do Moses Ingram's Reva justice. But for now, I'd say it's a B, C. It's either a C plus or a B minus in terms of Moses Ingram and Reva. Let's see what they do with the potential spin-off, if in fact that's actually happening. So most people have been talking about Reva, but I'm more focused on this show. Ewan McGregor really does come out of this show smelling of roses, because whether you like the directing, editing or writing, it's amazing how a great artist can, you know, he can kind of, I suppose, straddle the fence and still make bad writing and bad directing look good. He's been absolutely fantastic. Now, let's talk about Leia and let's talk about the dynamic between Obi-Wan. So clearly, again, Kathleen Kennedy doesn't think it's fair that Obi-Wan and Leia didn't have much of a relationship and it was all about the boy, Luke Skywalker. So they decided to put Luke in the background because he's had his time in Star Wars, and they decided to represent the female, the iconic Princess Leia. From a certain point of view, I understand that. Give her some screen time, give her this bond with Obi-Wan. I actually thought that they were going to mind wipe her at the end, because when we get to A New Hope, obviously there's no mention of any of that, and although she's contacting him via the message, via R2-D2, and she's calling him General Kenobi, there doesn't seem to be any familiarity about it. But I suppose you can kind of get away with it. So it was a good little dynamic. I think the young actor, the child actor playing Leia, did a good, solid job. I can't believe there's people saying that her performance was bad. She's a fucking kid, for Christ's sake. Even if it is bad, you don't say it. But I don't think she's the most amazing child actor in the world, but I don't think she's that bad either. So I think they stuck the landing with that dynamic. The problem is with the show, and this is an issue, because when you see episode 6, it feels like the third act of a movie, because that's exactly what this series was written and filmed to be, a movie. It's a movie split up into a series, and in the finale you can tell that. But I think it was a good, solid finale, but there wasn't much dialogue. It was Vader and Obi-Wan fighting, and then we've got this ridiculous kind of situation where Reva's going after Luke. Basically, she's found out that Luke is Anakin's son, so she wants to kill him for revenge. Now, unfortunately, again, the writing and directing doesn't explain that, and some people may be confused. What's her motivation? That is Reva's motivation, to get justice for all her brothers and sisters. Well, they weren't proper brothers and sisters, but, you know, they were all raised together in the Jedi Temple that Vader killed. That's her whole arc. So I get it. And in the end, I think they finished her story off really, really well. But they wanted something to divert while they were doing the Vader scenes. It's a bit like when Yoda and the Emperor fighting at the end of, in the third act of Revenge of the Sith. Then you're seeing Anakin and Obi-Wan fighting. It's really compelling, isn't it? Unfortunately, it wasn't as compelling here. They didn't have a compelling offshoot moment while they were going back and forth, you know, in the fight between Vader and Anakin. And I think that was a huge, huge problem. Ultimately, it was a solid finale. As I say, I had a few tears. It was okay. We had two brilliant cameos. We finally saw Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn in the end, and I thought it was brilliant. And kind of the interaction between, you know, Ewan McGregor and Liam Neeson was brilliant. And give me some of that. Give me a series where, you know, Liam Neeson's Qui-Gon Jinn is sending Obi-Wan on missions. That would be great. Take my money now. And, of course, we finally saw in this series as well, we saw the Emperor. We saw Palpatine, which was a great little cameo as well. Obviously, they had a small budget, but in the end, they did it, and it's brilliant. So, basically, this Kenobi series, when we heard it announced, we thought it would be a lot better than we actually saw it become. It wasn't the awesome thing we hoped it would become. You know, they were calling this the greatest rematch of the century, or whatever they were saying. And it wasn't. The fights weren't that epic, weren't that awesome. They were okay, they were solid. They tried to make Vader this big bad boy that we've always imagined him to be. And I give them like a B- for that at the least. But this is a tame show. As I say, it's not the best, it's not the worst. I've seen it now, I'll probably never see it again. And this really sums up modern day entertainment. And isn't that a shame? Because I love Star Wars. Now, let's talk about Miss Marvel. Clearly, Miss Marvel wasn't created in the comics or in a streaming television show for a 49-year-old man. I loved the first episode. I thought the second episode was a complete waste of time and a bore draw. But this week's episode was absolutely brilliant. I love the way they represent the Muslim culture. It's brilliant. It's great for Muslim people to get this representation and inclusion, and I think they're doing a great job. But I'm not the kind of bloke who says, oh, you need to see yourself on the screen. I don't see that. I just want to see great characters, because for me, it's aspirational to see a hero and say, well, he doesn't look like me, she doesn't look like me, but I'd love to be them. So it's different from me because I come from another mentality, another generation, and that's okay. But this is a great show, and I love the lead. For me, the relationship and dynamic between Bruno and Kamala is the most beautiful thing about this show. It reminds me about, it reminds me of the relationship between Clark and Chloe Sullivan in Smallville, and it's my very, very favourite thing about the series. So this week's episode sees Kamala meet her, I don't know, ancestors or something. They were from, we've got this great flashback from, was it the partition of India or something like that, in 1942, and that's where they found the bangle or whatever they call it, right, that Kamala's wearing now. And basically this woman tells her, who's related to the boy who's got a crush on Kamala, and she's saying, we're not in our dimension, we need your help and the help of the bangle to get us back. So at first Kamala's thinking, well, this is awesome. Then she asks Bruno if there's any way of doing it. Now, Bruno's an intelligent lad, he's a SWAT, and he tells her, look, I've looked into it, it's possible, but people will die. There could be a bang, there could be explosion. Basically, it's fucking very, very dangerous. So Kamala messages the lad and says, it's going to take time. The mother is not happy about that, so she's all going, we're going to have to force her to do it. Well, that's not very nice, is it? So they're at this wedding. I think it's Kamala's brother's wedding? I wasn't paying that much attention. I apologise. The wedding looks great. We had a group called Brown Jovi. Look, I don't know. I'm not going to say anything about that because I know way above my head, way above my pay grade. Anyway, so this woman and her family actually invade this wedding and all fucking hell breaks loose. They have this awesome kind of battle, and it really was a great little awesome and epic little third act of the episode. So I really enjoyed it. So this show is really building up to something I think solidly special. I know the audience isn't really high for it, and young people are watching it and minorities are watching it, which is great. But for me, a 49-year-old man, I think if I can sit there and enjoy it, look, sometimes I'm glazing over and I'm getting a little bored because it wasn't made for me. That's the thing. But ultimately, I think Kamala's story is pretty good. I love her friendship with Bruno as well. We'll see where that's going by the end of the series, because I've never read the comics. I don't really know much about Kamala, so we'll see where it's going. But I do like the family dynamic. I do like it as a show, and I'll say this week's episode is definitely a 7.5, 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. This has been Movies TV Mad. I am Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection. And I'll see you again in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.